everybody. Welcome. My name is Shannon Murphy, and I'm one of the editors-in-chief at the RES journal Ecological Entomology. And I'm based here in the University of Denver, which is in Denver, Colorado. It's great to see so many people from around the world joining the RES monthly online talk today. We have a great session lined up, which I'll introduce soon. But first, I have a few general housekeeping notes and updates from the Society. First, please keep your microphones on mute and your cameras off throughout the talk. This conserves bandwidth and minimizes disruption for our speaker. However, we would like to encourage questions in the chat for the speakers, which we will continue to monitor, and we'll do the questions at the end. So we have plenty of time for questions, so please do add them to the chat throughout the talk rather than saving them up for the end of the talk. And please also use the chat to introduce yourselves. We want to make these meetings, although they're online, as friendly as possible for everyone who's involved. So the next slide, there we go. Upcoming events. So I'd also like to take this opportunity to highlight some of the remaining Society events coming up this year. We might be in October, but there's still lots to come in the remaining months. The Society runs events throughout the year across all fields of entomology and offers significant discounts to RES members. So you should really take a look at the full range of events on the website and consider joining as a member if you haven't already. So first, the annual Insects Food and Feed Conference is coming up at the end of October, and the full program is now available to view on the website. Talks will address where we are with insect proteins, how we can integrate them within the food systems, and understand developments in the invertebrate welfare. The evening before the main conference, there will also be an exciting public panel debate taking place, chaired by BBC journalist Melanie Abbott. And tickets include a wine reception following the debate. So I wish I lived in England because that sounds awesome. I would totally go. On September 2nd, the 2nd of November, you can join the RES Northern England representative for an afternoon at Manchester Museum for an opportunity to go behind the scenes and visit the museum's entomology collection. The Orthoptera Special Interest Group will hold its annual event at the Natural History Museum on the afternoon of Wednesday, the 6th of November. Registration is now open, including the option for an annual supper. And then finally, you can join the Sustainable Agriculture Special Interest Group on Friday, the 8th of November at Newcastle University for a day where they'll delve into the latest innovations in research and practice across agricultural entomology. And early bird registration for that one is now open. So on to today. These online talk sessions run the second Wednesday of the month from 16 to 1700 UK time, or 4 to 5 p.m. Each session is aligned with one of the RES 7 scientific journals, which you can see on the slide here. With global research and fast turnaround times, publishing with the RES journal is a great way to disseminate your research and provides income to the Society, which is really important because that income then supports the entomological community. And the 7 journals span a wide scope. And if you have any specific questions, you can contact Emily Amier, who's the RES Director of Publishing. I would like to highlight, though, that 3 of our journals are currently having calls for associate editors. And so that's the journal that I edit for, Ecological Entomology, but then also Agricultural and Forest Entomology and Physiological Entomology. And I'd really encourage you to consider these roles. You'll play a key role in the evaluation of scientific and editorial content of the submitted manuscripts. You'll learn how this process works, support the management of the peer review process. So the Society credits the valuable work of its associate editors by including their names and the published version of each paper that you'll handle through the accept on the website. 2nd of December. I was associate editor at Ecological in 2014, so hardly a decade has passed, but I love editing for this journal and helping society
Hi, Shannon, you've just cut off for us. Would you mind turning your camera off, as it might make it easier for us to hear you? Thank you.
Sorry, I don't know if I just dropped out or if everybody just dropped out. I'm also not sure where I lost it.
That's fine. We can hear and see you now. You did drop out, but it might be
frozen for a second.
Yeah, you did.
I'm really sorry.
No
Uh,
worries.
I'm not sure where I got on that, but just to say that editing for a journal has been amazing and you should all do it. All right, so today we're going to be highlighting ecological entomology, which is a journal that focuses on publishing original research on ecology of insects and related invertebrate taxa, and aims to publish papers that are motivated by ecological or evolutionary theory and will be of considerable interest to the wide community of ecologists. So now on to today's talk. So our speaker today, I'm very pleased to welcome Jane Stout as our speaker. Jane was recently elected as the new president for the Royal Entomological Society and is based at Trinity College, Dublin. So Jane Stout is professor of botany and is an internationally renowned expert on pollinator and pollination ecology and a prominent voice for biodiversity and its value. Her research seeks to understand how land management practices, including agriculture and urbanization, affect ecological processes and the benefits of nature for humans. Jane works across disciplines and with a broad range of stakeholders in the public and private organizations to improve environmental policy and practice. She leads a large team of researchers in the plant-animal interactions research group in botany and in the school, which is in the School of Natural Sciences in Trinity. She is co-founder and chair of the board of the Irish Forum for Natural Capital and co-founder and deputy chair of the All Ireland Pollinator Plan. Jane's current research focuses on understanding and reversing drivers of pollinator loss, including exposure risk from. Also, she works with stakeholders across sectors. So after Jane's talk on pollinators and pollination, influence of policy and practice, she will make introductions as the new president for the RES. And so, Jane, with that, I'd like to invite you to go ahead and take over and start your talk. Thank
Thank you
you.
very much, Shannon. Thanks for having me. I'll just try and get my slide up. There we go. Hopefully you can all see that now. Thanks very much for that introduction, and thanks for the opportunity to speak with you all this afternoon. I'm really excited to talk about my research, which Shannon just introduced to you there, and about how this research in pollinators and pollination led me into the world of policy and practice. And as Shannon said at the end, I'll say a bit more about the Royal Entomological Society and my role as president as I just start into this job. So I'm Professor of Ecology in the botany discipline in the School of Natural Sciences in Trinity College, Dublin. That's my real home, but at the moment my day job is that I'm the Vice President for Biodiversity and Climate Action for Trinity. So I lead our sustainability unit and the development and implementation of our sustainability strategy. So that kind of pulls me away from the research a little bit, but I am still doing the research. And really, just to start off with, I wanted to introduce myself to you. And even though you see my affiliation is Dublin, my nationality and my passport are Irish as well as British, I have an English accent, and that's the result of having spent the first 27 years of my life growing up in rural England, that you can see in the slide here. So this is where my academic education started. You can see my village school there in the bottom right-hand side of the slide. And I grew up surrounded by nature, mostly farmland, and my ecological interests really when I grew up were largely botanical. I have to confess I didn't learn to love insects until I was in university in the University of Southampton, and I did an undergraduate project on predatory ground beetles as part of my environmental science degree. But then I started a PhD on bumblebees, and I became fascinated with their ecology, how they choose which flowers to feed on, how they move between flowers of different types, how they interacted with other animals that are also feeding on those flowers. And I was very fortunate to do my PhD with Dave Goulson and John Allen, investigating all of these things. So looking at the behavior of bees on different flowers in mixed arrays, what influenced the pollination of the plants. And actually, just to say there, I was just looking at who's in the audience here, and there's a couple of my PhD classmates. So it's lovely to see Tanya and Mary in the audience here today. And I was very much influenced at this stage by the the entomologists who were working on bees at the time, including Dave Goulson, but also Sally Corbett and Juliet Osborne. And really, there wasn't an awful lot of interest in bees in pollination ecology. And people questioned, what's the point? What's the point of studying bees? But then, of course, fast forward a few years and pollination has become a really hot topic, particularly animal pollination. And this is a figure that I use when I'm teaching what pollination is, the release, the transfer and deposition of pollen. And most plant species are animal pollinated. So the plants can't move, but animals can. And winged animals, especially insects, are very efficient at this pollen transfer and affecting this pollination process. So nearly 90% of all flowering plant species on this planet are animal pollinated to some degree. And really, then the world woke up and noticed that pollination was a really important ecosystem service for food production systems, so critical in terms of a benefit that humanity derives from nature. And in 2007, Alex Klein and colleagues published a paper that almost every pollination ecologist knows and cites in their work, showing that 3/4 of the world's leading food crops are animal pollinated. In this part of the world, where I am in Ireland, we don't produce an enormous number of animal pollinated crops, but things like field beans, oilseed rape, orchard crops like apples, and soft fruits like strawberries and raspberries. But further afield, really important commodity and globally traded crops like coffee, cocoa, and this plant here on the slide, which is shea, from which we get shea butter, which is a really important ingredient in cosmetic and confectionery industries. And I had the privilege to work on shea pollination, in Ghana and Burkina Faso in West Africa. So people started to realize, people in general started to realize that loss of pollinators could have severe socioeconomic impacts, both on farmers' incomes, but also on whole food systems, on food availability and choice, on our health in terms of healthy diets, and also in the provision of luxury products. And it's not just the poorer economies that are at risk of pollinator loss. So we did some work with some economic modelers and showed that some of the large developed countries around the world, the large developed economies like Japan, UK, Germany, are also at risk from pollinator loss because of the importance of the global trade in insect pollinated crops. And because of this recognition of the importance of pollination in our food supply and in our economy, and because pollination is often carried out by obligate flower visitors that rely on flowers and floral resources for the whole life cycle, like bees have become iconic. So from the point when people couldn't see any reason for me to be doing a PhD on bees, to the point that when I tell people I work on bees, they say, oh gosh, yes, bees, they're very important, aren't they? And I've just put a meme on here that somebody said, I remember when I used to see a bee and go, yikes, a bee. And now I'm all, wow, a bee, hi, you okay there? Do you need anything? Can I get you a drink, cushion? You want to borrow the car? It's this real change in attitude. And bees have become this poster child for pollinators. Now, a lot of these Save the Bees campaigns may have been driven by the honeybee lobby, particularly in response to colony collapses and colony losses in North America in the early 2000s. But now really the idea that bees are useful to people and are good parts of nature has really expanded beyond honeybees. And globally, there is so much more than obviously than just the European honeybee. There are 20,000 species of bee worldwide, and they have a huge range of morphologies, life histories, behaviors. So on the screen here, I've got the biggest and the largest. So Wallace's giant bee, this is a giant resin bee that lives in termite nests in Indonesia, and it collects the resin to form its own cells. It's threatened with loss of habitat due to oil palm expansion. So these are our biggest bees. Really quite rare, to some of the smallest bees then, some of the tiny stingless bees that live in colonies in the tropics that actually aren't stingless. They do have a sting, but they don't use it. They actually can bite you instead of stinging. But there's this huge diversity and huge fascinating group of insects in the bees. But when we talk about pollinators, it's not just bees that are important, but other flowering visiting insects are as well, especially the flies, but also butterflies and moths, wasps, beetles, and in other parts of the world, in the tropics, vertebrates, birds, bats, and even some mammals are important pollinators. And really, if we think about it, the definition of a pollinator is a very botanocentric definition. So any animal that visits a flower and in doing so moves pollen and affects that pollination process is a pollinator. And here I'll just plug the lovely new RES Insects book, which was written by members of the Royal Entomological Society. And there's a tiny little piece there that I wrote on pollinators, basically saying that is that there's a diversity. So why do we need a diversity of pollinators? Could we not just save the honeybee and everything would be grand? The answer is no. We need a diversity of pollinators. It's this diversity actually contributes to the value of the service provided. So it's important to have diversity for pollination services. So we contributed to this lovely global study that looked at the relationship between diversity, so the number of species, the pollinator richness, and the delivery of pollination, crop pollination service. And also on there's two graphs here. The one on the right is in relation to natural enemy richness and pest control services, and found these lovely positive relationships. So as you get more species of pollinator in a crop system, as you get more species of a natural enemy in a crop system, you get an increase in the pollination service and in the pest control services that are delivered. And another study that we were part of, led by Ben Woodcock, showed that this might be because of when you have diversity of pollinator species, you get this functional diversity. So you end up with different species possessing different traits in different pollinator groups. So different traits in terms of body size, in terms of behavior, in terms of flight period, and all of these things contribute to the pollination that they provide. So here again, an increase in diversity can maximize yield. So diversity is important. But we know that that diversity is declining. So here I just have some statistics from Britain and from Ireland. So in Britain, it's been estimated that a third of wild bee and hoverflies are in decline. In Ireland, we looked at the 100 species of bee that we have here in Ireland, and 30% of those are at risk of extinction, and 50% of our bee species are in decline. So we've serious problems in terms of decline in our bees in Ireland. In terms of the butterflies in Ireland, it's slightly lower extinction risk, and the red list for the hoverflies is still ongoing. And this is a pattern that seems to be reflected in other places around the world. And the drivers of this decline in pollinators are similar to those that are driving biodiversity loss worldwide. So we're seeing a loss of habitat for pollinators, which means they've nowhere to live, they're homeless. We see a decline in wildflowers, which means that they're hungry, they're not able to get the nectar and pollen that they use for food. We see an increase in pests and diseases and invasive species, which can make them sick. We see an increase in use in pesticides, which can poison them. And of course, all of this against a backdrop of a changing environment due to climate change. So when we think about what's driving decline in pollinating insects, we have to think about what it is that they need in their local environment. So they need places to nest. They need nesting resources. They need flowers. They need both an abundance and a quality of different floral resources in the landscape. These floral resources may be contaminated, so they're influenced by level of contamination, by pesticides and other agrochemicals, and also they're influenced by their interactions with other species, so with competing species, with pests, with diseases. And as I say, all of this is influenced by what's going on at a greater scale in terms of changes in climate. So a lot of the work that I've been involved in has been to understand these things, and largely in agricultural landscapes in Ireland. So for those of you who haven't been to Ireland, 70% of the land area of Ireland is agricultural. A lot of it looks like this. A lot of it's grass for livestock grazing. It's not like the beautiful meadows that I had on my title slide. We do see more multi-species swards grass swards coming in now, but really the grassland agriculture in Ireland is very heavily dominated by a single species, by ryegrass, and there's very little for pollinators in these fields. What we do have in these landscapes, which you can see in the photograph, are hedgerows and other unfarmed areas that provide resources for pollinators across these landscapes. But we've just said that we need a diversity of pollinators, therefore we need a diversity of different resources to be available. So a diversity of different types of features in the landscape is needed to support diversity of pollinators. And this is the sort of the general patterns we found from a study across a gradient of farmland types in Ireland, where we found that where in landscapes where there were more ditches, we had more hoverflies, presumably because of the larval resources that were provided by ditches. But there were more hedges, there were more bumblebees. Hedges provide both foraging and nesting opportunities for bumblebees. When there were more crops, we found fewer solitary bees. So when there was more arable agriculture in the landscape, there were fewer solitary bees. But when there were more species of flower in the landscape, we saw more solitary bees. So what this is telling us is that we need this diversity not only in the floral resources that are available, but in the landscape and the landscape features that provide the resources that insects need. And of course, we know that insects can be influenced massively by synthetic chemicals in the landscape. There's been a huge amount of work over the last 10 to 15 years on pesticides and the impacts of pesticides on pollinators. And a recent PhD student of mine, Elena Zioga, spent many hours extracting and analysing nectar and pollen from crops and from adjacent wildflowers, and looking at the contamination by a range of different pesticides to both the crop plant and the wildflowers. So we know that bees and other pollinators are being exposed to these agrochemicals. We also know that exposure to various agrochemicals can affect foraging behaviour, so it can influence the rate at which insects visit flowers, and it can ultimately affect the reproductive success, particularly in bees. And there's a study here that I've referenced that was part of the Posh Bee project, which is a pan-European study looking at the interaction between pesticides, disease and nutrition on the pollinators, managed pollinators across Europe. So we know that pesticides can influence floral choice, learning, and ultimately reproductive success. But the quality of floral resources isn't just influenced by synthetic chemicals like the pesticides that we found in the nectar and pollen of the crops and the wild plants, but naturally occurring plant toxins can influence bees, other pollinators, and their behaviour as well. And this plant species here in this slide is a common invasive plant species across the islands of Britain and Ireland, Rhododendron ponticum. And this species is native to the Iberian Peninsula, and its nectar contains granotoxins. So there you go, just to prove that once upon a time, a long time ago, I did actually get in the field and do some field work. There's me extracting some nectar from flowers, and work that we did in collaboration with Jerry Wright and with Phil Stevenson and Mark Brown. We looked at these nectar toxins and looked at the effects they had on pollinators. And what we found was that this so-called toxic nectar influenced different bee species in different ways. So it kills honeybees after just a few hours. So these granotoxins in the rhododendron nectar are lethal to honeybees. It has sublethal effects on solitary mining bees, but apparently no effects on bumblebees, which are the main pollinators of the rhododendrons. So pollinating insects, I suppose, just a few examples there is that they're being influenced by a whole range of things. So what's in the landscape, how the landscape is managed, and the additions to that landscape from synthetic chemicals, from pests and disease, and from other invasive species. And if we add on top of that the stresses that they're under as a result of climate change, as a result of extreme weather, we've all seen this year the abundance of insects has been influenced by a very cold spring. We're all aware at the moment of the hurricanes that are happening in Florida. These extreme weather events, as well as the slow increase in temperature globally, or rapid increase in temperature globally, it has potential to have further compounding effects on our pollinators. So this is important to understand what it is that's driving pollinator decline, because, as I said earlier, most plant species on the planet are in some way animal pollinated. And often the focus of research has been really on what the impacts of that are in terms of our crops and our food systems. But remember that most of our landscapes are full of plants that are animal pollinated. So there's much wider implications for pollinator decline than just impacts on food production and financial economic impacts. So plants are the base of the ecosystem. Lots of insect pollinated plants. Lots of those plants that are insect pollinated, and so the loss of pollinators could have repercussions through the food chain and on ecological function. And because plants help to create the landscapes that have historical, cultural, social, and aesthetic benefits to people, it's not just crops that are important. And of course, there are also very strong moral reasons for valuing pollination services and valuing pollinating insects. They may have no apparent value to people right now, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be concerned about their decline. And because of all of these different values that we derive from nature, not just pollination, but nature in general, the World Economic Forum now puts biodiversity loss very near the top of the top 10 risks to the global economy in the coming decade. So this recognition from 25 years ago when I started my PhD and people wondered why on earth I would look at insects, to this understanding that biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse is fundamental to human society and economy, has represented a change in attitudes. And if we put everything I've been talking about into a framework, and this is a modified conceptual framework based on the IPBES framework that I worked with Lindix and others on, we know that if you look at the box on the right-hand side there, we know that these drivers that I've been talking about affect nature. They affect biodiversity in that bottom box. This affects nature's contributions to people on the left-hand side there, and influences the quality of life and well-being for people in the top box there. So what we need to do to address this is the things that are in the green boxes in the middle. Generate the knowledge, take practical action, but also address the bigger picture stuff. So institutional governance and other direct drivers of loss. The question is, how do we do that? And one way is through policy. And we actually have a policy framework there that's for all of us to build on. We have a global framework for biodiversity that was agreed in 2022, and it includes targets to do all of the things that we need to halt and reverse pollinator decline. So to restore degraded ecosystems, reduce invasive species and pollution, enhance biodiversity in farmland and urban areas, to restore and maintain nature's contributions to people, for businesses to disclose their impacts, to reduce harmful incentives, ensure finances and knowledge are available, etc., etc. And there's a target number 14, which does integrate biodiversity in decision-making at every level. And if we did that, that would make a massive difference. In Europe, we have a biodiversity strategy and an upcoming nature restoration law that specifically targets addressing pollinator decline. And there's not really any other group of organisms, apart from perhaps trees, that have been called out for particular restoration. But pollinators have really become a focus both in the public eye and in the policy eye. So we've got this very strong and much needed policy response. But how that trickles down into action in individual countries is really the key thing. And here in Ireland, our National Biodiversity Action Plan cites the implementation of actions for the All Ireland Pollinator Plan and funding pollinator monitoring as the two key actions to address pollinator loss. And this is where the practice comes in. So we have the policy framework, we have the policy. Now, what do people actually do? How can we as insect scientists influence that action? So, as I said, in Ireland, we have the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, and really this is a bottom-up shared plan of action across multiple stakeholders and sites. So, in contrast to a lot of countries where pollinator plans have kind of come top-down from government agencies, this one was really a coming together of like minds and the development of a bottom-up plan that's since been supported by that policy that I just mentioned in our National Biodiversity Action Plan. We launched the Pollinator Plan in 2015, and it's been enormously successful. So it's been adopted by all local authorities. So all local authorities on the island of Ireland have pledged to support the Pollinator Plan and act in a more pollinator-friendly way. We've more than 400 businesses signed up. We've schools, colleges, sporting organisations, local community groups, farmers groups, and it's fed into policy at a European level as well. So we've had this extremely positive uptake of the All Ireland Pollinator Plan. And one of the successes of the plan is the guidance that people are given in order to take action. So we've got this policy framework to halt and reverse pollinator loss. How do we actually do that? How do different people on the ground, how do different sectors actually do that? So what we've done in my research group and in other research groups that have grown up in Ireland is to provide that evidence. So the photographs on the left of this slide are my research team out in the fields doing the science, finding out what conservation actions are appropriate, what kinds of habitats support insects the best, etc. And on the right are the guidelines that have been developed from that research. So our work on understanding pollinators on farmland in Ireland has informed the farmland guidelines. Understanding the use of imported and understanding the origin of imported bumblebees has led to the guidelines for users of imported bumblebees. Starting work on solar farms, the impacts of solar farms has informed these guidelines on solar farms, etc. So through doing the research, doing the insect science, we not only inform policy, but we also inform practice. And that's what makes the implementation of the policy possible. You'd think we had it all sorted, but doing the science has also shown us that the problem isn't yet solved. There are lots of people taking action, but pollinators don't seem to be recovering yet in Ireland. And we got the newsletter from the All Ireland Pollinator Plan today, which showed that from the bumblebee monitoring scheme, we're still seeing an overall year-on-year decline in bumblebees of around 3% since the scheme started just over 10 years ago. So we're not seeing that recovery yet. But it's not just about science. I think, this is the point, is we can provide the science, we can provide the evidence, we can provide the guidance, but people have to make a change. So we also have to share our love, our fascination for insects that act as pollinators, our value and our respect for nature in general. And it's very rare for a scientist to be comfortable talking about love, but actually having that enthusiasm, having that interest, that fascination and that love that a lot of you in the audience and members of the Royal Entomological Society have is really, really important. And that engagement and getting people enthused is really important to action. So I'm just going to summarize here, and then before I say something about the RES, I suppose it's not all about bees, and I know I talk an awful lot about bees. It's not all about bees. They do provide a great focal point, but diversity is crucial for ecosystem service provision, for resilience in the face of global change, both diversity of species, but also that diversity that I was talking about in terms of landscape features, in terms of habitats, and in terms of conservation approaches. We also need diversity in who is taking action. So to restore diversity in our pollinator species, in our insects, we need collaboration between insect scientists, economists, chemists, planners, engineers, business and economics, and collaboration outside of academia as well. So with businesses, with communities, with the policymakers, because they're the ones taking the action on the ground. But I guess my final point is that there's still so much that we don't know. Our pollinators are still in decline. There's an awful lot of rare species we know very, very little about. And so we do still need more of the underpinning science. We need more entomologists. We need more pollination ecologists. And I've also said in there, we need more love. We need more love for insects and for our pollinators, and this general appreciation for nature and its value. So this brings me to talking about the RES and why I agreed to become president of this wonderful society. And I hope some of you in the audience have looked at the strategy, and in particular at the values that are articulated in the current strategic plan. And these are all values that were amply demonstrated at the recent ENTO meeting in Liverpool, which I was delighted to be at last month. It was supportive, it was welcoming. Our scientists are confident in their knowledge and their expertise. The RES is inclusive of anyone, anywhere. It's lovely to see that there's people in the audience today from all around the world. It's an inclusive organization, and just don't let the royal in the title of the society put you off. It's not exclusive, it's welcoming, it's inquisitive. Like I say, being curious and fascinated is so important for the restoration of biodiversity. And the Royal EntSoc values being collaborative. And as I said at the end there, we don't get very far in the study of the insect science without collaborating, both between disciplines, but also outside of formal academia as well. And as we come towards the end of the last strategic plan, so I've put up there the priorities that were in the strategic plan from 2022 to 25. I'm really looking forward to working with the RES team to build on these strategic priorities to implement the next phase of the strategic plan. It really is an exciting time of growth in the society, and I can really feel that, and I'm very excited to be part of that. And of course, the grand challenges in entomology, and some of you in the audience may have been part of this process of identifying these grand challenges in entomology. And this is really what I've been doing my whole research career, and it's great to feel part of a larger effort to do that. So, this collaborative feeling, this feeling of being in a society of like minds, makes you feel you're not all alone in shouting about how important insects are and how we need to study them, but part of this collective action. And so I suppose, one question that I asked myself was, what does the RES president do? When I drew a bit of a blank, I asked the fabulous Jane Hill, what does the RES president do? And it's all of these things, and probably more that I haven't discovered yet. So chairing council, attending other committee meetings, like I said, being involved in the strategic planning for the organisation, working with the wonderful RES team and the other fabulous trustees, and really being an advocate for the RES and for insect science in general. Luckily, I don't have to do this on my own. There's a fabulous, like I say, the team from the RES and the trustees and all of the members of the society. But also we have a wonderful vice president, Professor Jane Stout, aka Wasp Woman. If you haven't read her book, I highly recommend it. And Serian is going to act as vice president as we work towards all of these things. So that's what I think the RES president does. What did the RES do for you, for the RES members? And the answer really is lots. So I suppose I'm just saying calling out for you to make the most of your society. So in terms of community, there's more than 2,300 members of the RES all around the world. So here are your collaborators, your supporters, your advisors. Please use them. And I saw some questions in the chat earlier on from early career researchers looking for advice. That's fantastic. The journals, Shannon mentioned at the beginning, 7 excellent journals. Publishing in these journals, not just reading them, but publishing them also supports the society. And as Shannon said, there's keep an eye out for vacancies in the journals to get more involved in those. Events, there's always lots going on, and Shannon mentioned some of the upcoming events at the beginning there. Awards and grants, funding. to do the entomology that you love. So please check out the awards and grants. There's the Antenna magazine, the newsletters to keep you updated, and the wonderful library and archives, which are really a fount of knowledge. So as well as keeping an eye on those vacancies, there's often opportunities to support in the public engagement activities, to join committees, and provide your voice for the future of the society. So if you're on the call and you're not a member, then please do sign up as a member. If you are already, then please check out the membership pages on the website. Excuse me. So I hope I've conveyed to you this afternoon something about my research, how that links policy and practice, and my enthusiasm for insects in general, and the RES particular. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jane. So we actually have quite a few questions for you in the chat. So the first one is from Chris and asks, thanks for a really interesting talk. My question is, does the All Ireland Pollinator Plan deal with unusual pollinators like various families of Diptera and even some Coleoptera?
I guess the answer is we'd love to. We have in the current plan of action, we have specific mention of rare pollinators and trying to support rare pollinators, and in the research section we have something about understanding more about the non-bee pollinators. You know, the handful of bees that we know a lot about is fairly small in the grand scheme of things. What we don't have in the pollinator plan is a huge amount of funding or capacity. So really, you know, those focused studies on Coleoptera or other unusual pollinators needs to kind of come from the researchers and feed into the plan. But we're, as I said, you know, the current plan is to 2025. So we will be next year developing the next phase.
So that leads into the next one, which is, what is the relative impact of different taxonomic groups on pollination efficiency? And how does this flow through to policy?
Oh, good question. I suppose it depends, pollination efficiency of what. So if we were going to take some really sweeping generalizations of crop plants, which is probably the plants we know the most about, there's a wide range of pollinating taxa. Bees, of course, feature heavily, but flies as well, and even for some crop plants, bats and birds. So it really depends on where you are in the world and which plant species it is that you're looking at. In the Irish context, in our natural, I suppose not very much of Ireland's actually natural, but in our landscapes in Ireland, it's really the bees and the hoverflies that are the most common flower visitors, the most important and efficient pollinators.
All right, so the next two questions kind of go together, I think. So the first one was regarding the actions and policies that come from science. Are you involved in assessing the impacts of these initiatives with the public or businesses in arresting pollinator declines, and perhaps at the landscape scale? And then the other person asked, I'm interested in if and how you're following up or measuring the uptake of the advice and guidelines, and how those guidelines make a difference when acted upon. So
okay, yeah. So I suppose what
you guys make
tracking, yeah, what's going on. So the what we have as part of the pollinator plan that's coordinated by the National Biodiversity Data Centre is a mapping system. So anybody who's taking action for pollinators can load it onto the system, and you know, so we can create a map with lots of dots on showing where actions are happening, and also which sectors are taking those actions. We had a lovely survey carried out by a master's student a couple of years ago that actually revealed that only about a quarter of people who are taking actions actually log them on that system. So we've got a system for logging and tracking actions, but not everybody logs them. So it's hard to keep track. I suppose that's the first thing. In terms of the businesses, the business supporters, they have to submit a report every year. So, you know, so that they're, you know, to try and discourage them using this as a bit of greenwashing, they actually have to tell us what they're doing. In terms of linking those actions to change on the ground, we do see when there's habitat restoration, we do see rarer species coming back. So we do see that when you do provide the habitat, you do get the rarer species coming back. But it's very hard to formally track and monitor that action into results because of lots of reasons, one being lack of capacity. Does that answer the questions?
I think so. If it doesn't, people can follow up in the chat and I'll re-ask the question.
Yeah, thanks.
The last one is actually mine. I was really interested in the rhododendron story, the invasive rhododendron. I hadn't heard that one before. And so I was wondering the bees that were like not negatively affected, the bumblebees, I think you said that weren't negatively affected by toxins, are they more specialized in their pollination behaviors such that the rhododendron wants to attract those bees? And then I'm also interested in knowing more about like in its native range, is it more or less toxic? And then do you have any ideas why that evolved, like to avoid nectar robbing or?
Yeah, I could probably talk for several hours on this. I'll try and keep it brief. We did a lot of work on all of those questions, so it's a real sort of contradiction that a plant should carry toxins in its nectar that would poison potential pollinators. So what we think is going on with the rhododendron, and now I'm really trying to remember whether it was more or less toxic in its native or in its invasive habitat, and I actually can't remember. But the one of the things that was different between the native populations and the invasive ones was the shape of the flowers, and we think that that has something to do with the fact that in the invaded habitats it's visited by real generalists. I mean, these bumblebees are total generalists, but so are the honeybees. So that kind of specialism of the pollinator thing was difficult to understand. The bumblebees, the shape of the flower and the position of the reproductive structures suits the size of the bumblebee bodies. So the bumblebees are well suited for pollinating rhododendron in both its native and its invasive range. So there's lots of questions about how this has evolved and the intricacies. And the other thing is that the native honeybees that make honey from similar rhododendrons in Turkey don't seem to have these same effects. So there's lots going on between invasion, the difference in the morphology and the nectar chemistry, the difference in the insects in those different places, and I feel like we got a long way to unraveling that story, but perhaps didn't get to the whole answer.
No, that's really cool. I love that story.
It's a cool system. Yeah.
The sounds like you did answer the last question. The people in the chat just said that was good. But there was a question of if you have a link to the mapping scheme that you were talking about.
Yeah, it's on. So all of the pollinator plan, all the guidelines and all the work is all free on pollinators.ie. And oh, thank you, Lydia has just put that into the chat with the mapping. Thank you, Lydia.
Okay, one last question about the rhododendrons. Are honeys from the toxic rhododendrons safe to eat?
In moderation, I think is the answer. And there's some lovely stories from the history books of armies being defeated because they've eaten toxic nectar, toxic honey. And if you eat it in large enough quantities, it can cause cardiovascular and gastrointestinal and problems in humans. So if you eat enough of it, it can be problematic. But eating a small amount, I think, is okay.
But the honeybees were killed by it in Ireland, right?
So yeah, our honeybees didn't like it at all. They popped their clogs fairly quickly. Yeah.
All right. So all right, one last question. Are stories or facts better to communicate the importance of insects to the public?
That's a good question. I would have said telling stories using the facts as a basis might be the best way. But no, actually, the stories are what capture people, and having those stories, and I think that's why pollinators and bees in particular have become such an icon for nature and conservation, is because it's a very straightforward story, that link between a bee visiting an apple flower and the tree actually producing an apple, so it's the stories that are based in the fact.
Yeah, I don't know if he's as famous in England as he was here, but Alan Alda was a famous actor here on the TV show MASH. And he started a whole center for science communication and offers classes to teach scientists how to communicate their science. And the whole basis of it is the importance of story, that you can draw people in with stories, but they should be based on fact. So yeah, I agree with you.
Brilliant.
All right, it looks like we've exhausted the questions and the comment. And so Amy, do you want to put the last slide on? All right, so thank you to everyone for coming today and for joining. And thank you, Jane, for such a great talk. It's also been great to be introduced to you as the new president for the society. And we hope that this has given everyone a good broad overview of the kind of research that's highlighted by not just the society, but in particular ecological entomology. So we have 2 more online talks this year, which you can see on the slide. As always, these are free to members, and we hope that many of you will be able to join the next one. So with that, thank you all so much for coming, and we look forward to seeing you next month.